So, all right, the camera's running. We're going to make the most of it, try to multitask. Being a little sloppy today because today is the day we got to finish Jeremiah. We just got to finish. The last day, we got a lot of ground to cover, so I'm not planning on taking much of a breath, actually. So you may need to yell at me if you need me to stop and try to address any questions. I'll try to have all the way in the middle, come back. But yeah, we'll do what we can. We're working on our coffee crisis in the back. The coffee maker decided it gave up. So.
It's working.
Oh, it's working. Good, good. All right, so Jeremiah chapter 51, we're picking up in the 15th verse. 15th verse, Jeremiah chapter 51. It is he who made the earth by his power, who established the world by his wisdom, and by his understanding stretched out the heavens. When he utters his voice, there is tumult of waters in the heavens, and he causes the clouds to ascend from the earth. He makes lightning for the rain. He brings forth the wind from its storehouses. All mankind is stupid, devoid of knowledge. Every goldsmith is put to shame by his idols, for his molten images are deceitful, and there is no breath in them. They are worthless, a work of mockery. In the time of their punishment, they will perish. The portion of Jacob is not like these, for the maker of all is he, and the tribe of his inheritance, the Lord of hosts is his name. God is great, you guys are stupid. Let's go home. That might be what it sounds like when we pull a scripture out of context, but what is the context? Babylon is falling. The one that was the agent, was the servant of God, was coming in to deal the, not really the death blow, but essentially the death blow to God's people and take them into captivity, is now going to be judged some 70 years, about 68 years later, and Jeremiah is pronouncing a prophecy concerning that. We're in the midst of that right now. Compared to God, all men are stupid. Every single scheme, the greatest idea that we would ever think of. And if you want to see stupidity, just look to higher education. That's where you find it. Just keep watching. And it's true. I've noticed this. You look in almost every area. I noticed it from a certain guitar player. He got too good at the guitar. And I know that sounds weird, but he was inventing his own scales. I mean, I think this guy went nuts. You know what I mean? Yeah.
So is the translation, I'm just curious, stupid, or should it be more like ignorant, or is it really derogatory?
Oh, senseless.
Senseless. I don't know about you guys, but all those sound a little derogatory. Are you senseless? Are you stupid? Or are you just ignorant, Greg?
I'd rather be ignorant.
Okay. Take your pick. But you know, it just reminds me. For the camera, Greg is none of those things. It's just, we think of them as being dumb because they worship idols, but at the same time, let's remember what an idol is. And I like thinking of the other word, idle. When your truck's idling, you're not going. It's vain, it's empty, there's nothing to it. Well, we worship idols too all the time. American culture worships money, worships pleasure, success, stuff. Yeah, and we serve it to the max just like other people did. So let's be clear. We are all, by nature, pretty stupid. But thankfully, God's helping us out. He says, you are my war club, my weapon of war, and with you I shatter nations, and with you I destroy kingdoms. With you I shatter the horse and his rider, and with you I shatter the chariot and its rider. And with you I shatter man and woman, and with you I shatter old man and youth, and with you I shatter young man and virgin. And with you I shatter the shepherd and his flock. And with you I shatter the farmer and his team, and with you I shatter governors and prefects. But I will repay Babylon and all the inhabitants of Chaldea for all their evil that they have done in Zion before your eyes, declares the Lord. When will God do that? Well, this is a reference to the Medo-Persian Empire. When they come onto the scene and they take over, they are going to shatter them. That's when God's going to make this happen. Behold, I am against you, O destroying mountain, who destroys the whole earth, declares the Lord. And I will stretch out my hand against you, and roll you down from the crags. I will make make you a burnt out mountain. They will not take from you even a stone for a corner, nor a stone for foundations, but you will be desolate forever, declares the Lord. Lift up a signal on the land, blow a trumpet amongst the nations, consecrate the nations against her. Summon against her the kingdoms of Ararat, MiDA, and Ashkenaz. Appoint a marshal against her, bring up the horses like bristly locusts. Consecrate the nations against her, the kings of the Medes, their governors and all their prefects, and every land from their dominion. So verse 25, when God says he's going to stretch out his hand, that's a meaning for power. He's going to show his might. He's going to show his power. When God stretches out his hand, just like when he told Moses, stretch out your staff, but when God stretches it out, it's a show of power. And he talks about there in that verse, it will roll down from the crags, and I will make you a burnt out mountain. You got kind of the picture of lava, how it's this slow rolling, hot ooze of a mixture that when it goes over, it destroys. Yeah, that's not the kind of stuff you want to be working with. And there's something soothing about watching molten metal and molten things in general. There's just something strange about how, like, wow, that is so intensely hot that flames can't compete with it. Well, that's the idea of God's judgment. You can't stop it. It's coming at the pace that he wants it coming. And there isn't, just like with lava, you can't put up, oh, lava shield, go. And I don't know what that is. I've never heard of lava shield. Maybe there is such a thing, but it's hard to come across. When he talks about these names, Ararat, MiDA, Ashkenaz, these would be some of the nations that were allies with the Medes. And remember, the Medes were the people group that occupied a larger territory than when Cyrus the Persian came up and united with them, forming a massive Medo-Persian empire. Other nations like these come together, so you have many nations, and then they're going to attack Babylon and overtake it. So that's what's going on here. So the land quakes and writhes in verse 29. For the purposes the Lord against Babylon stand, to make the land of Babylon a desolation without inhabitants. The mighty men of Babylon have ceased fighting. They stay in the strongholds. Their strength is exhausted. They are becoming like women. Their dwelling places are set on fire. The bars of her gates are broken. One courier runs to meet another, and one messenger to meet another, to tell the king of Babylon that his city has been captured from end to end. The fords have also been seized, and they have burned the marshes with fire. And the men of war are terrified. For thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, the daughter of Babylon is like a threshing floor at the time that it stamped firm. Yet in a little while the time of harvest will come for her. So again, picturing this judgment. It's coming, you can't stop it, it's going to be severe, and it's going to be brutal. That term when he uses, talking about the fords there, and that was right there, around verse 32. When he talks about the fords, it's interesting because that's probably referring to the Euphrates River, as well as the many canals that they diverted off from that particular river. And we talked a little bit about this last week. We brought it up before. That was one of the amazing things about Babylon. They had these massive walls, this huge city built basically right on the Euphrates River, and they diverted so much water to make their land as fertile as it could be. Well, it's also interesting that he says this because historically we know, well, I shouldn't say we know, we have good archaeological evidence, historical evidence, that there was not a great amount of bloodshed or huge battling in the conquest of Babylon. Because we talked about this before, the Persians diverted the water, got the entire water level to drop, and marched right underneath those massive Babylonian walls in the city of Babylon. And we're able to just, hello, and there they are. And we're able to overtake it. There was obviously some fighting, and some accounts kind of talk about that. But by and large, there's not a ton. So it kind of makes sense. The evidence that we see here, since we don't see a lot of evidence of long-term battle as far as like walls being destroyed and all this other stuff, signs of battle. But what is said here makes sense. You've got the dealing with, you got the army coming into the city, you're taking it over, and then you're lighting fire to all the reeds, the marshes. Well, any of those lands that had water on the surface, but anything dry above it that could burn, what are you trying to do? You're trying to find people who are hiding. Any of those Babylonians who are trying to sneak away or get out of there or whatever, set fire to all that, and they're going to smoke them out, quite literally. So this technique makes sense. You know this very well is probably what happened, and that explains why we don't see a lot of evidence of major catastrophe, major destruction, but at the same time there was some fighting that happened. It's consistent with what Scripture talks about. So, verse 34, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, has devoured me and crushed me. He has set me down like an empty vessel. He has swallowed me like a monster. He has filled his stomach with my delicacies. He has washed me away. May the violence done to me and to my flesh be upon Babylon. The inhabitants of Zion will say, and may my blood be upon the inhabitants of Chaldea. Jerusalem will say, therefore thus says the Lord, behold, I am going to plead your case and exact full vengeance for you. I will dry up her sea and make her fountain dry. Babylon will become a heap of ruins, a haunt of jackals, an object of horror and hissing, without inhabitants. So in these verses, you got the people of Judah, God's people, pictured as crying out in pain and in agony. But then you get to the 36th verse there, and God answers. God answers their plea as a just judge might and just bring down the sentence. He brings down the sentence, and notice the way he brings it down. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to dry up their canals. Well, what have we already talked about? That's exactly what happened. That's exactly the strategy. It kind of makes you wonder, like, if Babylon had paid more attention to Jeremiah, could they have possibly averted the very military crisis that was coming their way? Because he kind of spelled out, I'm sure they weren't thinking it, but he kind of spelled out the technique that was about to take place and that the Persians used. So that is interesting. Verse 38, they will roar together like young lions. They will growl like lions' cubs. When they become heated up, I will serve them their banquet and make them drunk, that they may become jubilant and may sleep a perpetual sleep and not wake up, declares the Lord. I will bring them down like lambs to the slaughter, like rams together with male goats. How Sheshach has been captured, and the praise of the whole earth been seized. How Babylon has become an object of horror among the nations. The sea has come up over Babylon. She has been engulfed with its tumultuous waves. Her cities have become an object of horror, a parched land and a desert, a land which no man lives and through which no son of man passes. So you've got a number of things going on here now in verse 38 and following. The Babylonians are pictured as animals. They're pictured as lions, and then we switch to the picture of sheep. Both as these different animals, and then when they're swept away, there's nothing you can do. And then in verse 41 and following, Jeremiah starts a lament, and it's a very sarcastic lament. Very sarcastic, oh, we're so sorry for what's happening to you. Sarcastic lament over Babylon. And remember when you see that word, this is a use of it again, Sheshach there, or Shishak, depending on how you want to pronounce it. That is actually the word Babylon using a cipher. That cipher that we mentioned a few times where you take the first letter and instead substitute it for the last letter. Then you take the next letter and then you substitute it for the second to the last letter in the Hebrew alphabet. And you keep doing that, it ends up spelling out Babylon. So that's what we're talking about here. And there are a few times where that code language is used intentionally. So spells out Babylon there. Object of horror, parched land and desert. And you can't help but think, since we've been discussing it, a place where no man lives and no son of man, like people don't want to go there. It's just crazy. This is the city of Babylon. Some of the wonders of the ancient world, dwelt inside of this city. The most prosperous place, crops 200 to 300 times that which you sow, you would reap there. This is the very place. And we watched that video last week about the ruins of Babylon. And the actual ruins of Babylon are utterly pathetic. The only reason why they don't look completely, utterly pathetic It's because back in the 90s, a guy named Saddam Hussein tried to rebuild Babylon, and so he rebuilt all this stuff. And what he rebuilt pales in comparison to what the real Babylon probably looked like. And so they're trying to make it a tourist attraction. They're trying to let people come in and see it, and they can't even get tourists to come over here and visit the ruins of Babylon. That's today. So God knows what he's talking about. I would say historically that really came true. People do not want to go there. There's nothing special about it anymore. It's not like it used to be. So that's God's word coming true. I will punish Bel in Babylon, this is verse 44. I will make what he has swallowed come out of his mouth, and the nations will no longer stream to him. Even the wall of Babylon is fallen down. Come forth from her midst, my people, and each of you save yourselves from the fierce anger of the Lord. Now, so that your heart does not grow faint, and you are not afraid at the report that will be heard in the land. For the report will come in 1 year, and after that another report in another year. And violence will be in the land, with rulers against her. Therefore, behold, the days are coming when I will punish the idols of Babylon, and her whole land will be put to shame. And all her slain will fall on her midst. Then heaven and earth and all that is in them will shout for joy over Babylon, for the destroyers will come to her from the north. Taste their own medicine. From the north, declares the Lord. In verse 44, you read that word Bel. Bel was the chief god of Babylon, of the Babylonians. And isn't it interesting? It says that their wall will fall. Now, eventually, the Babylonian walls did crumble, right? They did crumble. But as far as we know, in the days of Cyrus, they didn't. They marched under the walls, and the walls largely remained intact. Now, my understanding is there is some evidence of some battle, and so there may be some destruction that took place to the wall there. So that might be what God is alluding to here. However, this word, this Hebrew word that is used for fall, is a very broad, heavily used word in the Bible. And it is one of those things, just like a lot of words we use today that are very, very common. It gets very generic sometimes, and it can have a lot of meanings. So the idea of to fall, it was used primarily for people who fell slain in battle, oftentimes. Or if I were to attack someone in the Hebrew language, if I wanted to, this nice guy here, I don't like his hat, so I want to kill him. Well, the Hebrew would say, I fell upon him. And you might read that in English saying, like, man, Seth can't walk very well. No. The Hebrew language, that's the way it says it. If you want to kill somebody, you fall upon him. That means you're attacking him in battle or whatever. So sometimes this word is used in a generic sense, and so it can be translated fail. And I would say if a wall doesn't keep out invaders, that wall has fallen. That wall has failed, right? Same thing with Trump's wall, I guess. It's fallen if it doesn't keep them out. I don't know. You know what I mean? Just those kind of things, right? The wall is supposed to serve a purpose. If you've got a giant staircase going right over the wall has ceased to function as a wall anymore. You know what I mean? So that's the idea of what this verse is talking about. These walls will indeed fail. They will indeed fail. Verse 49, indeed, Babylon... Sorry, I did want to make another comment, but I'm just looking to see if it was pertinent or not. The destroyers that come to her from the north. All right, I think we'll get into that a little bit later. We're going to get into that a little bit later. Okay. Indeed, Babylon is to fall for the slain of Israel, as also for Babylon the slain of all the earth have fallen. You have escaped the sword, depart. You who have escaped the sword, depart. Do not stay. Remember the Lord from afar, and let Jerusalem come to your mind. We are ashamed because we have heard reproach. Disgrace has covered our faces. For aliens have entered the holy places of the Lord's house. Therefore, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will punish her idols, and the mortally wounded will groan throughout her land. Though Babylon should ascend to the heavens, and though she should fortify her lofty stronghold, from me destroyers will come to her, declares the Lord. the sound of an outcry from Babylon, and of great destruction from the land of the Chaldeans. For the Lord is going to destroy Babylon, and he will make her loud noise vanish from her, and their waves will roar like many waters. The tumult of their voices sounds forth, for the destroyer is coming against her, against Babylon, and her mighty men will be captured, their bows are shattered, for the Lord is a God of recompense. He will fully repay. I hope people get the idea of what's about to happen to Babylon now, because it's not good. He's really, really emphasizing it. But towards the beginning of this passage, it's kind of funny. He's talking about, don't stay. Remember the Lord from afar. You have escaped. Let Jerusalem come to your mind. He's talking here to the people of God, the people of Judah, and he's saying, guys, you're free. The walls are down. You're out of here. You're not protected. There's a way of escape. But what's the people's attitude? Right after he's saying that, depart, do not stay. I'd say it's pretty well emphasized right there, right? Depart, do not stay. What are they saying? Disgrace has covered our faces. Aliens, strangers, not green men, but those aliens that are not from that region, that's what they meant, foreigners. They've entered the holy places of the Lord. Like, the temple. Oh, the temple. No, we blew it, the temple. I just think that sometimes we can get so down on some of the bad things that are happening that we can completely miss an awesome thing that God is doing. Do you see what I'm getting at? Do you see what I'm saying here? God has just opened it up so they can run, and what are they doing? Oh, the temple. Well, that was 70 years ago, guys. Like, yeah, you did blow it, but aren't you done crying about it now? You already blew it, and that generation's dying out, the next generation's coming up, but they're still in mourning. It's okay to be upset about a mistake you made, but if you're so upset that you can't open your eyes and see God's delivering you now, God's got something better for you. We all have bad things happen. We all go through tragedy, right? But some people never stop going through it. Some people just live in that moment of tragedy, and they will never let themselves out of it. And we as Christians I don't think we are immune from that. We can be so tormented by bad things that have happened or things in the faith that took place that, and I've seen people like this too, a Christian treated them in a very unchristian-like manner. They cheated them or they took advantage of them or whatever, and they just will never let it go. Just will never let it go. What a sad way to live. That's not just sad in the sense of you doing something wrong. That's sad in the sense that you're robbing yourself of some great satisfaction. God's doing some great things, and he does many, many, many of them through other Christians, through other people, right? But if you're so bent out of shape about that thing that happened, you might be missing the great thing that God's put right in front of you. And I find it kind of funny. That's what these people are doing. They're crying about the temple 70 years later, but God's letting them free, and he's having to, get out, the door is open, get out, shop's open, whatever, Anyway, verse 57, I will make her princes and her wise men drunk, her governors, her prefects, and her mighty men, that they may sleep a perpetual sleep and not wake up, declares the King, whose name is the Lord of hosts. Thus says the Lord of hosts, the broad wall of Babylon will be completely razed, and her high gates will be set on fire. So the peoples will toil for nothing, and the nations become exhausted only for fire. The message which Jeremiah the prophet commanded Seraiah, the son of Neriah, the grandson of Maaseiah, when he went with Zedekiah, the king of Judah, to Babylon in the 4th year of his reign. Now Seraiah was quartermaster. So Jeremiah wrote in a single scroll all the calamity which would come upon Babylon. That is, all these words which have been written concerning Babylon. In verse 37, talking about Babylon, I'll make her princes and her wise men drunk. That is probably an allusion if you go way back to chapter 25. What is in chapter 25? What has Jeremiah spoken about many times? Take this cup of wrath and drink it. It's my wrath, it's my judgment. I don't want to drink it. Drink it. That's what God says. Well, they have to drink their own medicine. The same judgment that they use is now come on them. One note that I have written down here that is probably worth mentioning, and I've heard this before too, and it's kind of thrown me off a little bit. There is some contradictory historical evidence about the size of Babylon and their walls in particular. Herodotus, the Greek historian, wrote down that they were, he estimated that they were more than 350 feet high, which that's colossal. That's monumentous if he was right. But my understanding is most modern scholars, based on archaeology and stuff, they don't think it was nearly like that. They would put it more at the 60 to 70 foot height range, which is still tremendously high. You know, that's far taller than the church building over here. And thickness, some say 40, 45 feet. I've heard as many as 70 or 75. But either way, we're talking, well, from that wall to this, if that's the thickness of a wall, you know, that's, what is this, 45 feet across, something like that? It's pretty close to it. That is one thick wall. So we get the idea, you get the drift. But if you ever hear something about, 350 foot walls, well, now you know there's one source that says that. We're just not sure that he's accurate about that or whatever. Maybe that fish just kept growing and he caught it. Sariah was Baruch's brother. And it just so happened that he was traveling to Babylon with the king in the position of quartermaster, from what I read, since I know nothing about it, for, dollar master for all I know, quartermaster. But he would probably go ahead of the king and maybe arrive there to make preparations to make sure the king got there in time. So, and everything was good. So Jeremiah had the opportunity to say, hey, take this scroll, take this letter, I want to make sure that it reaches the captives there in the city of Babylon. And what's also cool is we have some archaeological evidence. We spoke about this several weeks ago. There was a seal that, from my research, my limited research, for years it actually fooled the scholars because it was a forgery, but they thought it was a legitimate thing. And it was evidence of Baruch. And it said Berechiah, son of Neriah on it. But it was discovered, some say, to be a forgery in more recent times. And thankfully, it's rare, pretty rare for those kind of things to happen. However, we have one that's discovered we best think is legitimate, and it speaks of Sariah here, his brother. So we still have some great evidence, and it's nice that God puts that out there. But we have to be cautious. It can sometimes get exciting when you know the Bible is true because you've seen it verified time and time again. And then somebody throws out this new evidence. You're like, whoa, this is great. And then you find out it was all made up or something. It's like, why do people do that? It's confusing. There was one time where we had I'll tell you guys this. I think some of you know this, but just in case you don't, if you ever read an article and it says on the top, the link says Babylon B, or it says the bold prophet. There's the bald prophet, the Babylon Bee. Is there another one? There's another one. There are a few of these websites that are humor websites. They write real sounding stories as a joke, as satire. And so you'll see, they'll have a Christian church, whatever, baptistry, and they'll have a picture of a mega slide coming down to it. They're trying to make a joke, or a future Calvinistic documentary earns 5 points. And you're like, okay, Calvinist joke, I get it. But there's some things that look real, and you might think, no way. I thought for real a music minister had to be rescued because his skinny jeans were too tight. And I thought that's what it said. Music minister has to be rescued with jaws of life to escape skinny jeans. And like, wow, this skinny jeans epidemic. But come to find out, it's fake. So just bear that in mind. Some of that's out there. Don't confuse it with the real stuff. The real stuff is worth your time, for sure. Okay, so that's Sariah, Baruch's brother. And it's just a reminder, even though Jeremiah was a loner in many ways, he had help. he had friends and he had support. And God gave him what he needed to do his job and to get through. We're going to read the rest of this chapter right here, and then we're going to take a couple-minute break. Give your mind some thoughts. Any of those questions or things you've been thinking about, we're doing okay schedule-wise, so let's address them, okay? Verse 61, Then Jeremiah said to Sariah, As soon as you come to Babylon, then see that you read all these words aloud, and say, You, O Lord, have promised, this would be a prayer, you say it to God, You, O Lord, have promised concerning this place to cut it off, so that there will be nothing dwelling in it, whether man or beast, but it will be a perpetual desolation. And as soon as you finish reading this scroll, you will tie a stone to it and throw it into the middle of the Euphrates and say, Just so shall Babylon sink down and not rise again because of the calamity that I am going to bring upon her, and they will become exhausted. Thus far are the words of Jeremiah. So this concludes the last saying, as far as we can tell, of Jeremiah. And they're ending by saying, read it out. Probably not to every single person there, because that might cause a bit of a riot, a bit of a scene, and trouble for the king. But some prominent people, some of the right people that God wanted to hear it, read it to them, then take it and symbolically, Jeremiah does this a number of times, right? Symbolic actions. And the Euphrates River was not, you remember that other thing he stuck in the Euphrates River? What was that other thing?
Linen belt.
That linen, belt that buried that near the Euphrates there. Well, now throw this scroll into the Euphrates River. Done. It's happening. You can't get it now, so you can't change anything. We'll pick this up in just a minute. Let's take a couple of minutes to get some coffee.
Me too.
I do want to talk about some overall lessons from Jeremiah. Really want to get to that. So, but chapter 52. So, chapter 52 appears to be, well, thus far are the words of Jeremiah, implying that, okay, that's it, Jeremiah's done. Some suggest, though, that Jeremiah wrote this chapter as well. And you might think, how is that possible? That doesn't make sense. Well, there's a theory. It's my understanding is it's Jewish tradition says that Jeremiah wrote the books of Kings, 1st and 2nd Kings. And a lot of what we're going to read here is almost direct quote. It's heavily adapted from the book of 2nd Kings, very historical account. And so maybe, in that sense, maybe Jeremiah did write it. So, it's an interesting thought. But at the same time, it does seem kind of weird that it would throw in this, like, thus far are the words of Jeremiah, kind of concluding the matter, if Jeremiah had some more words to say, But I suppose it's possible, like, Jeremiah finished saying this one prophecy, we're going to hear another thing from him. So, however, a lot of people think, and I think more scholars, as far as I know, think that Baruch was the one that probably penned this down. And I have no problem with that, because we know Baruch was right there with Jeremiah. He was organizing what Jeremiah said. And throughout Scripture, God does that often. He has his people, and then he has those that work really close with his people, sometimes helping to write down. What New Testament gospel is a perfect example of that?
Mark.
The Gospel of Mark, exactly. Who probably really wrote, if you will, who probably spoke a lot of the words that come from
Peter.
Mark?
Peter.
Yeah, the Peter. Mark being described there. So this is the same thing. So Baruch would be a very appropriate one to do that, to make sure that this is intact. So that's probably what's going on here, but I don't want to say I know more than I do. So chapter 52. Here we go. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he became king, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. He did evil in the sight of the Lord, like all that Jehoiakim had done. For through the anger of the Lord, this came about in Jerusalem and Judah, until he cast them out from his presence. And Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon. Now it came about in the 9th year of his reign, on the 10th day of the 10th month, that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came, he and all his army against Jerusalem, camped against it, and built a siege wall around it. So the city was under siege until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. On the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine was so severe in the city that there was no food for the people of the land. Then the city was broken into, and all the men of war fled and went forth from the city at night by way of the gate between the two walls, which was by the king's garden, though the Chaldeans were all around the city, and they went by the way of the Arabah. Please remember, we are done talking about Babylon's destruction, which is some 68 years in the future. We're not talking about that anymore. That was a futuristic prophecy that Jeremiah was picturing as good as done. We are back to Jerusalem. We're back to the home base where Jeremiah's ministry has been. And this chapter is an excellent summary chapter. As a matter of fact, in my opinion, it seems like a good way to start the book of Jeremiah is to read the very last chapter of Jeremiah, because that's giving a pretty helpful historical overview of a lot of what takes place in Jeremiah's years. So this is about Jerusalem, the siege of the city of Jerusalem at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. Much of this is adapted from 2 Kings chapter 24, verse 18, to the end of the book. I believe it ends in chapter 25, if I'm not mistaken. So 2 Kings 24:18 and following is where we're going to see a whole lot of parallel. You can kind of tell, right? It sounds like we're reading 2 Kings. If you've read those recently, you can hear that formula. This king, this Saul, when he reigned, he was good or he was bad. This was his dad, just boom, 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 straight to the point. Yeah. And unfortunately, you're going to read that he did evil in the sight of the Lord a lot more often than he did what was right in the sight of the Lord. You just will. Okay. But the army of the Chaldeans, this verse 8, pursued the king and overtook Zedekiah in the plains of Jericho, and all his army was scattered from him. Then they captured the king and brought him up to the king of Babylon at Riblah in the land of Hamath. He passed sentence on him. The king of Babylon slaughtered the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, and he also slaughtered all the princes of Judah and Riblah. Then he blinded the eyes of Zedekiah, the king of Babylon. The king of Babylon bound him with bronze fetters and brought him to Babylon and put him in prison until the day of his death. Now on the 10th day of the 5th month, which was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, captain of the bodyguard, who was in the service of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He burned the house of the Lord, the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem. In every large house he burned with fire. So all the army of the Chaldeans who were with the captain of the guard broke down all the walls around Jerusalem. Then Nebuchadnezzar, captain of the guard, carried away into exile some of the poorest of the people. The rest of the people who were left in the city, the deserters who had deserted to the king of Babylon, and the rest of the artisans. But Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, left some of the poorest of the land to be vine dressers and plowmen. Now the bronze pillars which belonged to the house of the Lord, and the stands in the bronze sea which were in the house of the Lord, the Chaldeans broke into pieces and carried all their bronze to Babylon. They also took away the pots, the shovels, the snuffers, the basins, the pans, and all the bronze vessels which were used in the temple service. The captain of the guard also took away the bowls, the fire pans, the basins, the pots, the lampstands, the pans, drink offering bowls, what was fine gold and what was fine silver, the 2 pillars, 1 sea, 12 bronze bowls that were under the sea in the stands, which King Solomon had made for the house of the Lord. The bronze of all these vessels was beyond weight. So you see what's going on. This is like the movie that ends, and it ends in a bad way, right? This is where you see, like, wow, everything you feared happening, the historical overview of it, just, here it is. Exactly like God said it would. It did. and it goes into great detail. And you can hopefully understand a little bit from this why, for future generations to come, some of the older people especially, they weep. They are so sad over this temple because they remember the splendor of something great. You can't really get out of your mind, I think, if you were able to feast your eyes on this, and I haven't, but obviously we haven't, but if we could, what they taught, Jesus, a city on a hill cannot be hidden. People in Jesus' day understand, man, the principal hill is Zion, where Herod restored the temple. Well, that was an amazing sight. But from what I understand of the original, King Solomon, mostly with gold amassed, wages amassed by King David, tons and tons of them, built this massive, big golden structure, probably blinding. People from all kinds of areas around would walk up. Oh, wow, that's where they take their God pretty seriously, man. That's where they have sacrifices and offerings to the God of Israel, And people who knew that now see the God of Israel, his very presence on earth symbolized at this location, and that location is getting trampled on, getting destroyed. Think of all the sentimental value that would be, all the trips that you took with your family, time and time again to offer sacrifices to the priest, and then all the stuff that the priests used that was so holy you were not allowed to touch, you had to stay away from it, you had to be respectful, and just watch it getting smashed, getting it destroyed, people spitting on it, doing whatever they want with it, they could care less, taking only what's valuable. This kind of emotion, you can see how it would be provoked in this. As for the pillars, the height of each pillar was 18 cubits, so that's roughly 27 feet, foot and a half or so-ish for cubit, length of this length right here. And this, in circumference of 4 fingers in thickness, 18 cubits, and it was 12 cubits in circumference and 4 fingers in thickness and hollow. Now the capital of bronze, the base of the pillar, was on it, and the height of each capital was 5 cubits, with the network and pomegranates upon the capital all around, all of bronze. And the second pillar was like these, including pomegranates. There were 96 exposed pomegranates, all the pomegranates numbered 100 on the network all around. Then the captain of the guard took Sariah, the chief priest, and Zephaniah, the second priest, with 3 officers of the temple. He also took from the city 1 official who was overseer of the men of war, and 7 of the king's advisors who were found in the city, and a scribe and the commander of the army who mustered the people of the land, and 60 men of the people of the land who were found in the midst of the city. Nebuzaradan, captain of the guard, took them and brought them to the king of Babylon at Riblah. Then the king of Babylon struck them down and put them to death at Riblah in the land of Hamath. So Judah was led away into exile from its land. These are the people whom Nebuchadnezzar carried away into exile. In the 7th year, 3,023 Jews. In the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar, 832 persons from Jerusalem. In the 23rd year of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuzaradan, captain of the guard, carried into exile 745 Jewish people. There were 4,600 persons in all. Now it came about in the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, in the 12th month, in the 25th of the month, that evil Merodach, king of Babylon, in the first year of his reign, showed favor to Jehoiakim, king of Judah, and brought him out of prison. Then he spoke kindly to him and set his throne above the thrones of the kings who were with him in Babylon. So Jehoiakim changed his prison clothes and had his meals in the king's presence regularly all the days of his life. For his allowance, a regular allowance, was given him by the king of Babylon, a daily portion, all the days of his life until the day of his death. That's where the book concludes. It is very interesting. In verse 28 through 30, we've got a number of numbers here. The numbers are relatively small, probably because either we're only referring to men, or the sadder hypothesis is these could be the people that actually survived the trip. It could be that the many thousands more just never made it. Many thousands just were not treated well and died on the journey. There's a different counting system going on here. It is just a different way of counting. They call it an accession year, I believe. Yeah, an accession year, and they just count 1 year later. So that's why these dates might be 1 year off from some of the ones you read in 1 Kings. Jehoiakim might have fared well because of the influence of another man by the name of Daniel and some of the friends that he had and their influence there. And if you want to read about Zedekiah and some of the mess that he got himself into in plotting, Zedekiah is just interesting because what a manipulator, what someone who thought, well, I'll just try to get God to save me. I'll rebel against Babylon anyway, and God will come through, even though I haven't fully obeyed him. Ezekiel 17 is a picture of how he did that, how he called out to Egypt, and he thought he could just work things out and then get God to step in on his terms. God doesn't work that way. God doesn't work on your terms. It's God's terms. That is the way it is. So, that's the kind of faith that God's looking for. We're at the end of our time. I'm just going to throw this on the screen real quick and then let you guys go. What should we learn from Jeremiah? Oh, I hope all kinds of things. I really hope all kinds of things. But these are some of the lessons, in my opinion, that really stand out. And I hope they make sense to you. I'll leave it up so that you can come see it later. I hope they make sense to you as you have gone through this with me, because there's so many things that I think God is teaching men like us, things that we need to hold on to as well. And some of them may be a little counterintuitive. Number 2 for me is definitely a little on the counterintuitive side. I think when I work too hard, I need a break. But yet God through Jeremiah says sometimes you don't need a break, you need to work harder. The reason why you're exhausted is you're not working hard enough. You're running with men, not with horses, that kind of thing. And so many other things like that. So, any closing questions? Any last thoughts? Well, if so, let's talk about them afterwards. Let's pray right now. God, thank you so much for the faithfulness of your prophet Jeremiah and for how what he did so long ago has been a blessing, has been really good and beneficial for us. God, since we've spent so much time going through these words, I know your word is never a vain thing, but God, I'm asking that you would bring to mind the appropriate passages, the appropriate sections, and thoughts and lessons from this book that we need in our lives so that we can be godly people. And God, help us to apply the right kind of lessons. I know it takes a certain amount of wisdom and discernment to properly apply what your word says, particularly in a book with a different historical context in a different situation. But God, I'm asking for that wisdom for me and for all these men here. And God, please help them and me. Help us to be like your servant Jeremiah, people who are willing to suffer for you if that's what it takes, never cave, but to continue to do the right thing, even to the point of exhaustion and pain. But God, to stand for you and to allow you to make us that fortified wall, that immovable fortress that we need to be. And God, rely on you for that instead of thinking we have to somehow figure that out on our own. Thank you for doing that for all of us. And it's in your son's name we pray. Amen.
So, Seth, are we
Meet next year.
reconvening in 3 weeks?
Yeah, well, I'm going to talk with the other teacher and then figure out what the next plan is. So I don't want to commit to anything just yet, but I've been bouncing around ideas as far as what, if we do another series, what it might be. We might try a topical study for a little bit. It will be shorter than Jeremiah. I can tell you that right now. So.
But to affirm, we're not going to meet the next 2 months.
Yeah, the rest of this year, the next 2 weeks, yeah, for sure. We'll announce in the bulletin or by some other means when we're going to get back together. Okay, so.
Like January 7th.
Whenever it ends up there. Thank you, sir.